Hello, everybody. Welcome back to American Textbook Reading. I'm Brian Stuart, and we're starting off with Book 4 in the Science series, and we're starting, of course, with Lesson 1. Lesson 1 is grouping plants. Grouping means to put things into different groups, and this is a big part of science, right? Scientists like to say how things are similar and put them together in a certain group so they can study those things as a group and see how they are different from other things. What are the differences between other groups? So, in this unit, we will talk about, or we will discover, how we can group plants together by their flowers and how we can group plants together by their stems. Okay, so this lesson will be all about plants. As usual, we start off with the vocabulary section. And our first word, actually two words, is flowering plant. Now, you know what a flower is, right? We have a nice picture of many flowers here, and flowers are, of course, there are many colors, many different kinds. Those are flowers. And then of course, you know what a plant is. But here we're combining the two words and we're using ing. So flowering, we're changing the flower, which is a noun, we're changing it into an adjective. So this whole word is now an adjective to describe what kind of plant is it. Well, a flowering plant, what kind of plant? It's a plant which produces flowers. So not all plants produce or create or make flowers. Only certain types of plants do, and we call those plants flowering plants. Okay. Next we have conifer. Conifer. Now, you probably have seen many conifers, especially if you live in the northern part or the southern parts of the world. There are not too many conifers in the hot regions around the equator. It depends also, of course, on your altitude. But anyway, a conifer is a tree that produces seeds inside cones. If you've seen a pine cone, pine cones are probably the most famous, most common, but inside the pine cone, there are seeds inside there. And the pine cone will fall off the tree, the seeds will fall out. Well, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but the seeds are protected by the cone. And of course, many people use those cones for decorations in the wintertime. But if you live in the northern areas or in an area where there's a lot of snow, there are many conifers. Pine trees, for example, are a very famous type of conifer. Next, we have moss. Now, moss grows on rocks, usually rocks. Could grow on buildings too, of course, concrete. But it's a small green plant that grows in wet areas. Moss needs water and usually a lot of water in the air to grow. Water in the air we call, by the way, is humidity. Humidity. So if there's a lot of humidity in the climate, there's a good chance that moss will grow. And moss is just that green plant that grows on rocks. It also grows on trees. And in fact, it's interesting. When I was growing up, I grew up in the American West, and people said, if you want to know directions like north, south, east, and west, there's a common saying that goes like this: moss always grows on the north side of the tree. Why would moss grow on the north side of the tree? Well, in the American West, that's north of the equator. So the sun is over here, the tree is here. The sun is at the equator, that's south, because you're in the northern hemisphere. So the sun doesn't really touch the northern part of the tree. So in the morning, when there's a lot of humidity in the air, the water stays on the north part of the tree longer. So that's better conditions for the moss to grow there. The moss doesn't really grow on the south side of the tree because the sun will dry that side of the tree out. It's too dry. There's not enough water. So instead, the moss will grow on the north side of the tree. So, that's kind of an interesting thing that I learned. It's not, it depends on where you are, of course. It's better to use a compass. But it's a common saying, moss grows on the north side of a tree. So if you want to know which direction is north, look for the moss. Okay? That will show you which way north is. Anyway. Fern. Now, if you live in, again, a cool but humid environment, and I'm thinking about the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington State, Northern California, a place where it's kind of cool, but there's a lot of water in the air. It's humid, and there's also a lot of trees covering so the sun doesn't really dry out the ground very much. You'll see a lot of ferns, and ferns are green plants with long stems and thin leaves. It's a perfect picture of them. And of course, wherever you live, you might see ferns. They usually grow on the ground in a forest, trees around, not too many trees because they need to have sunlight, but that's where they usually grow. And you can hide in the ferns, right? Your dog probably likes to play in the ferns, but usually ferns will occur in cool rain forests. Okay? Spore. What is a spore? Well, you know what seeds are. Many plants produce seeds, and if you eat an apple, you can see the seed. But some plants don't create seeds, they create spores. And a spore is a tiny reproductive. Reproductive means a new organism can grow from it. Of course, a seed, if you have an apple seed, a new apple tree can grow from the seed. Well, a new fern can grow from a fern spore. Reproductive bodies of ferns and mosses similar to the seeds of other plants. So ferns and mosses, they don't create seeds, they create spores. Next, we have contain. Contain means to have something inside an object. So there's a very good example. That's a good picture. You know, there's a seed inside the avocado, but we can also talk about, you know, contain doesn't just mean natural things. I have a water bottle. It's a plastic water bottle. This plastic water bottle, what's inside it? Water. So the plastic bottle contains water. It's to have something inside of an object. Okay, that means to contain. So an avocado will contain a big avocado seed. Okay, avocados are good for making guacamole, by the way. Okay, good. Anyway, contain. Maple. Now, Canada is famous for their maple trees. Maple trees grow in northern climates where it's cooler, and they have big leaves. They have really large leaves. Maple leaves are quite large, and they turn red or yellow in the fall. So when it gets colder and it's going to be winter soon, the maple leaves, they're very large. They're useless during the winter because there's not a lot of sun. So the tree, you know, if the tree could think, it's thinking, I don't need my leaves in the winter. It's just wasted energy. So the leaves will die. And as they die, they turn red or yellow, very beautiful in the fall, but then they fall off the branches, and in the spring, new leaves will grow. So a maple tree is a tree with large leaves that turn red or yellow in fall. And maple trees are also famous for making syrup that you put on your pancakes. Yum, yum. Okay, so good. That's a maple tree. Okay, those are our words for this lesson. Let's go over the first main idea of this lesson, and that is grouping plants by flowers. Now, at the title, the introduction of this lesson, I said scientists like to group living and non-living organisms, you know, things in nature. You know, scientists study the natural world. And as human beings, we like to group things. We like to put things into certain classes or groups. And of course, that's exactly what's going on here. So scientists will take a look at all different kinds of plants and say, well, these plants are plants that create flowers, or these plants don't make flowers, they do something else. And so they'll give different names to those different groupings, and that's how they will know very quickly. If that's your field of study, you can very quickly, oh, this is this type of plant, that's that type of plant. So how do they group plants by flowers? Well, of course, it's very easy. If a plant if a plant creates a flower, they call those flowering plants. Now, that's not the scientific name, but that's an easy way for us to remember, most ordinary people. Flowering plants obviously have flowers. Flowers can make fruit and seeds. So that's important. All plants reproduce. So scientists will look at plants to see how they reproduce, and plants will reproduce in different ways. So some plants will create flowers to make seeds or fruits that will have seeds inside them, and that's how those types of plants, that grouping of plants, that's how they reproduce and keep growing for new generations. But not all plants do that. Some plants don't have flowers. For example, pine trees. And pine trees, as I said, is a type of conifer. Conifer trees or conifer plants have no flowers. They don't have flowers. They have cones. And I talked about cones before. It's hard to describe if I can't show you a picture, so I didn't try. But this is a good picture of a cone here. They have cones, and the cones contain seeds. So, I was trying to get to that before. The seeds are inside those cones, and squirrels and other animals will try to get those seeds out because they're very good to eat during the winter time. So, of course, the cone kind of protects the seeds. It makes it more difficult for the animals to get to those seeds. And hopefully the idea is that maybe the animal will pick up that cone, get some seeds, but other seeds, as the animal moves that cone, other seeds will be scattered. Anyway, so that's how conifers, pine trees, and other trees like that will reproduce. Now, there's another way too. Other plants are mosses and ferns. They do not have flowers. They don't even have seeds. Instead, they use spores to reproduce. And spores are really small. I didn't go over that in the vocabulary, but spores are very small and they're very light. If there's a wind, the spores will distribute. They'll freely disperse or spread out with a slight wind. And that's important because if the spores are small and light, they can easily spread over a larger area, and the plant has a larger chance of reproducing or creating more plants over a wider area. And that's how mosses and ferns will reproduce. Now, another way to group plants is to not look at how they reproduce, but to look at the physical characteristics, the physical parts of the organism, whether it's a plant or an animal. In this case, of course, we're talking about plants. So we can classify or group plants by the physical characteristic of the stem. And remember, the stem, we talked about this actually in book 3. I hope you were with me for that. The stem is a part of a plant that supports the body of the plant. Okay? So, of course, when we think of stem, we can think about a tree, and we don't say the stem of a tree. We have a different word for it. So we call it a trunk. So the tree trunk. Don't say, wow, that tree has a large stem. That sounds strange. We don't say that's isangheo. That's very strange. We would say that tree has a very large trunk, or wow, it's a really thick trunk. Now, some trees have long and slender trunks. I'm thinking of aspen trees in Colorado, which are very beautiful because their trunks are white. They have white bark. They're very beautiful trees. So anyway, a tree will have a main stem, and they're called a trunk. So we call the stem a trunk. But tulips, we do say, tulips and many other types of flowers like that, flowering plants, roses, for example, they have stems. And stems, when you think of stem, you think it's not very strong. You can break it easily. Don't go around breaking them just to test it, but that's not good. But if you're picking the flower, you can pick it because you can break the stem very easily. You cannot break a tree trunk very easily. So it's a big difference between a tree trunk and a stem. However, the tree trunk is a stem. It's a type of stem. Okay, so a tulip has a soft green stem, and it's easy to break it off and give to your mom or your girlfriend if you have a girlfriend. And she will appreciate that. But be careful about whose tulips you're picking, right? Your mom might get angry if you take the tulips out of her garden. Okay, so anyway, those are stems. Bush. Now, If you go outside, perhaps around your apartment complex or around your houses, in your neighborhood, in the city, you will see many bushes. Bushes have many woody stems or wooden stems. And of course, bushes, if you look inside a bush, you can see a lot of stems going every which way. And it's hard to move through a bush. I don't recommend it, of course, go around the bush. But the reason it's hard to move through a bush is because they have a lot of stems going every which way. And of course, some of these are branches, that's true, but it's hard to move through a bush. And many bushes will grow together, so their stems might cross each other, and it kind of forms a wall. It's very difficult to move through there. Now, another type of plant is a cactus. And a cactus, depending on the cactus, it will have a thick stem that stores water. This, of course, is a picture of a saguaro. We talked about that in an earlier lesson. There are smaller, the saguaro is a really big cactus. There are smaller cacti or cactuses as well. And they store water in their stems because they live in the desert and they need to have water. All plants need water. So cacti, let me just do this here quickly, spell it for you. The plural of cactus is cacti, but a lot of people also just say cactuses. Cacti is the old Latin plural of cactus, but most people don't know that, they don't care, and they just put es at the end, cactuses. Same thing with octopi or octopuses, right? So, same thing. But anyway, cactuses will have thick stems that store water. Okay, so we can group plants by whether they make flowers, how do they reproduce. We can also group plants by their physical characteristics, and one way is by their stems. Okay, now it's time to do the reading. So as usual, I will read the reading out loud. You guys can repeat after me or repeat in your mind. Think about the pronunciation of the words and, of course, the meaning of the words, especially the ones that we looked at in the vocabulary. Are you ready? Let's begin. There are two types of plants. One type has flowers and the other does not. Flowering plants have flowers. Flowers can make fruit and seeds. An orange tree's flowers make oranges. The fruit contains seeds. Flowers can make seeds without making fruit. Most vegetables have flowers. We sometimes eat these flowers. Conifers have no flowers, but they have cones. The cones contain seeds. The seeds fall out of the cones. The seeds, they can become a new conifer tree. Another tree with no flowers is the maple tree. It has unusual seeds. They look like wings. The seeds can travel a long way from the tree. Mosses and ferns are unusual plants. They do not have flowers or seeds. They use spores to reproduce instead of seeds. Mosses often grow on wet rocks. Ferns usually live in warm, shady, and wet places. Okay, so let's go over how this reading passage is organized. How is the information in the reading passage organized? And what we have here is main idea and details. So this is a very common organizational pattern. You have a main idea, and then you support that main idea with details. What is the main idea? The main idea is that one type of plant has flowers, and the other type of plant, you don't have to say that, but it's inferred, it's already known, type of plant, does not what? Does not have flowers. So you don't have to repeat this information, right, in the same sentence. It's just kind of known. So one type of plant has flowers, the other does not have flowers. Okay, good. So what are the details? The first detail is that some plants have flowers and fruit. Fruit contains, beep, What does fruit contain? Again, in the reading passage, they talked about oranges. If you open an orange, you will find these little hard bits. Don't eat them, and don't, they can hurt your teeth, so don't bite them, right? And of course, we don't eat them, but you can use them to plant a new orange tree, and that's a seed. Same thing for apples. So fruit contains seeds. Seeds. Okay, so fruit contains seeds, and that's how those plants will reproduce. They are flower-producing or flowering plants. Now, the next detail starts with a blank. Beep, right? Blank have no flowers, but they have cones which contain seeds. And we talked about those types of plants, right? And I gave you an example, a very famous example, are pine trees. Pine trees are a type of conifer. So conifers, because there are many types of conifers, conifers. Conifers have no flowers, but they have cones which contain seeds. Okay, so that's how they are different from flowering plants. Now, there's another type of plant that the reading passage mentioned, and it's another type of plant, but there's two examples of that type of plant. One was mosses. Do you remember the other one? The other one, of course, was ferns. Mosses and ferns. Yes, ferns, and that's an E. Okay, so ferns, mosses and ferns do not have flowers or seeds. What do they use? They don't use seeds. Remember, they're very fine, they're very small. They can be carried by the wind very easily. We call those spores. So they use spores, S-P-O-R-E-S, spores to reproduce instead of seeds. So not seeds, spores. So mosses and ferns don't have flowers or seeds. They use spores to reproduce instead of seeds. So this lesson was all about classifying or grouping different types of plants. And as I said at the beginning, this is what scientists do, right? A lot of scientists, especially biologists, will group, and of course other types of scientists as well. It's not just biologists, but especially biologists will group living organisms into different groups. And that's why you have all sorts of species names and families and different groups. But that's a whole, that's a very deep lesson. So this is a very important part of science, to group things together in order to see, because if you group them together, you can kind of get a better idea about how they work, how they reproduce, how they live, how they evolved. And so you develop a deeper understanding about these living organisms when you do this. So grouping, classifying is a very common technique in science. And as we've seen, scientists will group plants according to different characteristics. How do they reproduce, and what types of physical characteristics, in this case stems, do different types of plants have? So you could basically do this same idea with almost any living organism or groups of living organisms. You can classify them according to how they reproduce or their physical characteristics, or maybe some other types of things that they do or have. So in this lesson, we talked about plants, how to classify the different types, and we went over some interesting vocabulary, I hope, and some interesting ideas about plants. I hope you've learned a lot. As always, thank you for studying with me, and we'll hope to see you in the next lesson. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.